reality. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to the Qalam Hangout here. Myself, Abdelrahman Murphy, with Sheikh Abdel Nasser Jangda here at the Qalam campus in Arlington, Texas. Welcome back. It's been a couple weeks.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Hopefully everybody's been doing well. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of a hiatus, a little bit of a break. We had the holidays and then just kind of getting back into the flow of things. So weren't able to make it happen last week, but did definitely want to sit down this week and talk about what's been going on.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So over the holidays, I went to Spain.
Yeah.
You went to Aruba.
I did go to Aruba.
How was Aruba?
Unbelievable.
MashaAllah. Yeah, I saw
It's
pictures.
Ridiculous.
Did you notice any of my nazar hitting you or no?
Yeah, I was just walking down the beach and I randomly fell on my face and I was like,
just knocked a tooth out.
Yeah, I was like, wait, is Murphy here?
So that's amazing. MashaAllah, get some family time.
Yeah, it was unbelievable, and it's really nice. I mean, obviously we got something to talk about today, but I actually did want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the idea of, and I mean, to each his own. I'm not one to sit here and criticize anybody for their own, just personal choices, as long, that are not detrimental or harmful, and understanding that different people enjoy different types of things. But I really, really value and kind of notice the benefit as well of doing things with my kids that kind of involve the outdoors.
You always have. I remember in Knoxville, you took them to the mountains.
Yeah, I mean,
the first thing you do when you got there.
Exactly. We, swimming in the ocean, they just wouldn't come out the water. They'd be in there for hours, and then building sandcastles and running up and down the beach, and it was a really awesome natural experience. Muhammad's out of control. The guy's a year old, and he doesn't know how to swim. But he insists that I take him as deep as I'm willing to go.
Oh, I remember that actually.
And he just hangs out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like how your Snapchat has become Muhammad's Snapchat.
Yeah, it's Muhammad's personal
Basically.
Snapchat.
Well, now featuring sous vide. Alhamdulillah, welcome.
Yeah, just healthy eating, trying to find different ways and excuses to do so.
Trying to cook my food and water.
Man, that's what I'm telling you.
It is. It's legit. It's actually nice too because of the the narrations about you shouldn't leave fire on while you're not home. So sometimes cooking, you get scared.
Yeah.
But this stuff makes it easy.
It is. It's pretty good.
Alhamdulillah. So yeah, we went to Spain. So Spain was...
That was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, and y'all also left a couple of days before I left. So, just also seeing, the pictures and the snaps and, just hearing the feedback from people, it seemed, subhanAllah, unbelievable.
It was amazing. MashaAllah, it was really, really amazing. Spain is, we can probably do a show later or an episode later with maybe
reflections from Spain.
Maybe bring, Ali Baluch down.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
When he comes down and talk about, the reflections that we had. But it was just awesome. I mean, I think in general, one of the things that we lack growing up in America is just this exposure to travel and getting out of the country, because America's so big. In Europe, you could basically drive for a few hours and you're in a different country. In Texas, you drive for a few hours and you're still in Dallas.
Yeah, pretty much.
So it's one of the things that we don't really have access to so much. And Canada. I mean, who really wants to go to Canada? Let's be honest.
That's not nice.
No, I was asking, does anyone want to go with me? Because I want to go. But honestly, I mean, we have Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
Which I have heard Mexico is amazing.
Unbelievable.
One of my friends went. Oh, you went on Jamaat, right?
I went in Jamaat, and I've also been with my wife just to go to nice places in Mexico.
Different kind of Jamaat. Better food than Jamaat.
Yeah, much
with
better
the wife.
food.
Okay.
Much better food, much better company.
Oh, that's not nice.
That was not
nice. Tabligh is going to show up and get mad. They're going to ask you, brother, please don't make us remind you the 6 points. So we took a trip to Spain. Alhamdulillah, that was really remarkable. The interesting thing about Spain, obviously, is that it's pretty much Muslim built in the architecture and in the buildings. And then you go, and all these buildings that were once masjids and madaris and different kinds of places like schools and all that kind of stuff, they're all Christian run now. They're all Catholic. So Catholicism is on the up and up there.
That one particular shot.
Which one?
Just took me aback. And I think I'd maybe seen it before, but I saw it when our group was there, when y'all were there. that I believe it's in the Masjid of Qurtuba.
Yeah.
And then there's like this like makeshift kind of chapel like in the middle of it.
Well, makeshift, it is a chapel.
Uh-huh.
It is. The masjid is no longer a masjid. Imagine like Masjid Nabawi without all the carpets. Basically, it's just a marble hall, and in the middle of that hall is a church. And what's interesting is that
It looks kind of weird because it's like it was just dropped in there.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, so this is the story behind it. Apparently, the leader of the time, he had like approved it without actually like seeing Cordoba before. So they conquer Cordoba, they take control of this massive masjid, and they just tell him like, we're going to convert it to a church. He's like, okay, cool. And he's not like thinking like, let me see it first. He just said, do it. He goes there and he witnesses like the beauty of this masjid and the grandeur and just like this incredible feeling of walking in. It really is remarkable. And he actually gets mad at the engineers and architects who built it. And he says, why did you ruin such an incredible place? Right? He got mad at his Christian architects for ruining a masjid. The mihrab is still there. They left the mihrab actually. So there were a lot of Muslims, but they're very like one of the guys bent down to tie his shoe and almost got in trouble.
Really?
Oh, there's guards hounding you. Yeah. Wild.
I used to hear these stories when I was young about how like you can get in trouble and busted and they're watching you to make sure you don't try to pray or drop a sajda or something like that. And I used to always kind of think, like Muslim rhetoric sometimes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this paranoid Muslim rhetoric, but it's really
no,
like
it's real.
that.
There's guards everywhere. And our friend Ali Baluch, who was there with us, my roommate, ultimate roommate, we actually got to our room and there's 2 twin beds, right? One for each person, but they pushed ours together. Like every room we were in, it was together. So I felt like we were married. But he had his camera and he was, they said he could film. They allowed him to film, but
I saw a snap where y'all were talking about like him getting in trouble with the camera.
So the guards, for some reason, they said he could film, but they were still watching him. It was very weird. He also had the big rig, so he looked funny. But so I played this game with the guards. So they're trying to be really like incognito and like unnoticed. So I said, watch every time. And you know me, like Allah has blessed me with a certain amount of shamelessness. And so like I'm okay with like making direct eye contact with somebody and just staring them down. And so I was like, watch, the guards are trying to be all slick and they're trying to walk behind you and walk through pillars. I was like, it's almost like a movie where like when you make contact, they'll disappear. So I'd like look directly in their eyes and they'll like turn around and walk away. So I was basically following Ali Baluch as he was filming, just looking at all these guards and making them run away because I was just staring at them. It was very odd. It was very
strange.
Very strange environment there, but it was awesome, man. And Granada was great.
I mean, again, like when we sit down to really talk about it kind of step by step, but just from an outsider's perspective, kind of like watching and observing from a distance, I saw that there were like a couple of different layers to the trip. And that's, I think, become something really cool about these particular trips. There was, of course, the sightseeing.
Yes.
That's one layer, which happens no matter where you go. That was in Aruba, going to the 37 different beaches in Aruba because it's just one island.
Yeah.
19 miles by 6 miles.
Wow, that's crazy.
So there's just that, the sightseeing itself, experiencing the uniqueness of the place. The second thing was the Islamic history because that's such a unique place of such powerful Islamic history.
Yeah.
And then the third layer, which I think has become something of a really unique dynamic of a lot of our groups that go, is it just seemed like everybody just became BFFs.
We're all BFFs, alhamdulillah.
Mashallah,
we started our WhatsApp group a couple weeks before.
Yeah.
And so everyone was sort of introducing, and they
so
were like...
was the WhatsApp group lit?
It was lit. It was actually lit AF. Lit also fun, right? That's what that means?
Yes, correct. Okay,
also fun.
absolutely.
Yeah,
We're back. We're back.
It was very fun.
We're back.
It was incredibly fun. There's balloons and streamers. Okay. So it's funny because those who know what that means, they'll laugh, but those who don't know. So we're safe either way. Stuck for Allah. Okay, so the people on the group were like, you basically get to introduce yourself and stuff, and then you meet, and like it's like you're hitting the ground running. You don't have that awkward icebreaker because your icebreaker was already done in the WhatsApp group.
That's pretty cool.
So we landed and everyone was really friendly and mashallah was really good, and we taught the Imam Ghazali text at night. We did the rights of companionship and community, so we talked a lot about that. One crazy thing that happened was that the first right that Imam Ghazali talks about, a responsibility, is al-haqq fi mal, right? The right that people have, the right that your brothers and sisters have over your money. And these aren't Sharia rights. These are more like good character rights.
Correct.
So he's not like saying that it's like halal or haram or it's wajib.
It's more like ethics and morality.
Yeah, he's just like, this is what brotherhood should feel like or sisterhood should feel like. And so he's using haqq here, not literally, right? But he's his language is very strong, and he says things like, if you're with somebody and they use the word mine, he said that the Sahaba and the Salaf, if somebody said my food, he said, don't be friends with that person. Because if you're sitting with them, it should be our food. Right? Like, it should be so communal. So we talked about the right of money and how important it is to give gifts, tahabu, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the famous hadith, give gifts, you'll love each other. So after that night, no one paid for their meals anymore. Someone always covered a meal.
Wow.
And this is like $400, $500 a meal because you're talking about 45 people.
Wow.
And we never knew who it was. So like some of the times I knew who it was. Some of the times I didn't know who it was. And it was just incredible to see people who had never met one another, come together, learn some of their deen, spend some time together, and all of a sudden now like be willing to pay money. Like money, it's hard to part with money.
It is.
So that was a remarkable experience, alhamdulillah. One experience that'll kind of lead us to our topic today that was really, really incredible was that when we were in Granada, actually. So Granada is the most Muslim populous city.
Till today?
Till today.
Okay.
It's because it was the last one to fall. So
okay.
it feels Muslim, like there's like halal restaurants everywhere. And
really?
Yeah. It's very different than the rest.
And they're like Spaniard Muslims.
Yeah. There's like indigenous Spanish Muslims. Oh, I'll have to tell you that story. That was wild. The one about Brother Mansour, may Allah have mercy on him and his wife and family. The indigenous Spanish Muslim community. It was amazing. Oh, subhanAllah, man. We'll talk about that another time. Inshallah. But in Granada, one of the things that really happened, and it really was a sobering moment. So amongst all the fun and good times, Europe, even though there's a lot of rhetoric and formal policy against refugees, you still meet a lot of refugees because they sort of slipped through the cracks and they made it. So one of the moments that sort of really struck us as a group was, along with being charitable with one another, we met a couple refugee families and they would basically come to us. And it's hard to imagine what this feels like or looks like, but I want you to imagine basically that you've been kicked out of your home and you have nothing but the clothes on your back and your passport. And you get to a new country. Let's say for America's example, you get to Canada and you don't speak the language of the people in Canada. Right? Let's say you get to like Montreal, they're all speaking French, right? And you're walking around and in your broken French, English, whatever you have, you're like just basically showing your passport to people. And it was truly heartbreaking because, obviously us being there as a group, we did what we could. We gathered money. We took care of the family that we saw. They were basically showing us their Syrian passports. And there's like no Syria for them to return to in terms of those people. I mean, they've been kicked out. If they go back, they're going to get killed. So they're showing us their passports, and they had like, young children and stuff like that. And I also mentioned this, I think, about our Turkey trip last year, that we met a lot of Syrian refugees there, obviously much more given the fact that they share a border. But, today's Wednesday. Yeah. It's December 14th. And yesterday, probably the most difficult and strong offensive on Aleppo that has been happening in Syria up until this point. And, Facebook... yesterday when I was driving home from Tafsir at South Lake Masjid, when I pulled into my driveway, or my garage, I parked and I just kind of like looked through my Facebook because I saw the notifications were like going insane, like 17, 18, like the red number. So I opened it and I see like all my friends are donating to this Syrian American Medical Fund, SAMS. And I'm just curious, like because for me, I was, again, all day, Tuesdays for me are my busiest day. So I'm like running around. So I look and I just see everyone's tweeting and hashtagging about Aleppo. And I go and I look at the pictures and the videos and that journalist Bilal Abdelkarim. And I'm just like, I don't know how you felt, but I felt completely lost. Yeah. Like when we were in Spain, we were able to gather money and give and hug and smile. But here I'm sitting thousands of miles away and I'm literally, I open my hands to Allah, make dua, and then I didn't feel right eating dinner. Like I go inside, Mehreen made dinner. It was like one of my favorite dishes. And like, honestly, like it was good, but it felt wrong, and I almost lost my appetite.
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts? Like, how did you react? I think a lot of people listening have had exposure and engagement with this story now.
Yeah.
What are some things that you were thinking?
There was that feeling initially of just getting like punched in the gut, kind of like losing your breath, losing your bearings, not knowing, what to think or what to do. There was that kind of followed with a little bit of shock and dismay, and eventually even anger, that how just brutal and merciless human beings can become towards other human beings. There was a little bit of like almost like just shock and dismay, like kind of being stunned that people can really do that to other people. And that just kind of led to a little bit of just kind of quietude, just trying to make sense of everything and gather my thoughts and myself together. And then there was eventually just kind of, again, not to say that to be okay with the situation, but there was a little bit of a realization that we do in this situation what we do in every situation, in all such situations, and that is to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So how, history is not, history unfortunately is not, foreign to this idea or stranger to this idea of massacres and genocides and things that are happening, mass murders, things that are happening today. How is it, one of the things that I saw on Facebook and Twitter was never again equals again and again. This notion that people were saying that, when these things happen to the Jews in the Holocaust, in Rwanda, in Srebrenica, when these things happened, in Kosovo, we keep saying these things like, oh, we'll never let it happen again. But like, what do we actually mean by that? And like, what kind of, how should we feel when we see these things? People were like writing apologies, and half of me was like, yes, I do want to apologize, but I almost feel like am I part of the oppression if I simply just share or write something online and think that has absolved me of my responsibility as a human being?
Yeah.
Writing "I'm sorry" to the Syrian people, like, they're not going to see your apology.
No.
Like, who are you really writing it for? Now, you could argue awareness, absolutely, but it seems like awareness at this point is too little too late. And so how do we sort of like understand, number one, from a historical perspective, how does this keep happening? Like, how does this keep happening? And number two, from a spiritual perspective, like, what do we do? Like, what does a Muslim sitting in America or Canada or the UK or anywhere besides Syria, basically, what do we do when these things are happening and it breaks our heart to see these things happening? What's our response?
Two things that, after a lot of kind of thought and deliberation, and that just kind of occurred to me, and these two ideas were kind of reinforced for me. Number one was, I'm going to draw a little bit of a parallel, not to make light of this situation, but I remember during the 90s when there was initially some awareness about, the environment and making sure that we started trying to solve the problem about just ruining, the environment and being a little bit more green. There was always kind of that idea that what difference can one person make? I remember this rhetoric a lot. What difference can one person make? What difference can I make? And we were always taught that it starts with everybody just thinking I'm just one person. But then everybody starts doing the same thing, and it becomes a lot of people doing good. I kind of see the same thing here. Like you kind of said, when we start taking care of refugees that might be in our own communities, when we start looking after and standing up for the rights of people in our own communities. Maybe it's the homeless. It's a very cold winter this year, so maybe it's looking after the homeless in our communities where they continue to shut down shelter after shelter, where it be African Americans who are continuously persecuted by law enforcement, where it be undocumented folks in this country who are being chased down and being treated as if they're not even human beings, as if they're just some cancer or they're weeds growing on the ground, and talking about ripping them out and throwing them out. If we just start practicing more goodness at our own individual level, challenging ourselves, and everybody can kind of take that on, that one person becomes 10 people, which becomes 100, which becomes 1,000, 100,000, 1 million, and hopefully 1 billion, and even beyond that. And that's how real change starts to happen. And I was a little bit, I mentioned this again, not as a personal attestment. I didn't do anything, but just as an inspiration. And it just so happens that that inspiration is somebody very close to me. It was unbelievable. This refugee couple, they are Palestinian refugees. Both husband and wife are both deaf and mute. And they were brought into the country. And what's really amazing is that they have 2 beautiful little children who can speak and hear. And they kind of got here and they were looked after, whatever, some church and some organization or something. And the brother, just kind of communicating with some folks, tried to find his way to finding some Muslims. And he basically showed up at a MIC at our masjid, Mansfield Islamic Center. And my dad was there because my dad's there all the time. And my dad spent the last week just kind of driving around with him, enrolled his kids in school, took them grocery shopping. He's taking them to get a car for him tomorrow, and just that type of goodness. Being able to do that for people, I think that's the first thing that we have to turn to, and we have to realize that that does make a difference.
And it seems like a really insignificant, if you zoom out a million
congratulations feet, you helped 2 refugees.
Yeah, right. But the interesting thing is when you look at it from above, the ripple effect that you've caused in that person's life. And this is the interesting thing about the hadith, right? It's to guide or bring one person to Allah is better than one. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam basically said better than a red she-camel, but that's essentially better than anything. And he didn't say a whole community, he said one person. Yeah. I think oftentimes in this hyper-capitalist society, we get so obsessed with numbers. how many people, as opposed to the qualitative impact. So for example, one of the tricks of shaitan might be that this is happening in Aleppo, what's $5 going to do? But in reality, first of all, don't put a limit on Allah's power to change things. $5 could be that medicine pill that's going to save that child's life. Your $5 could have contributed to that. And the second thing is that if everybody, like you said, if there's a macro wave of $5,
exactly,
then imagine the sustenance that's being provided for these people.
If every one of us started looking after one family that's distressed in a war zone or is homeless or is a refugee family, then, think about the impact of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing we have to kind of stop just kind of sitting there and just kind of almost paralyzed by just, kind of that paralysis by analysis type of thing, but just kind of paralyzed by just the thought of it and just thinking about it and talking about it. And then on the spiritual side, when you read in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمْ, your Lord, your Master said, أُدْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. Call out to me, pray to me, ask me, and I will answer you. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, الدعاء هو العبادة, that is the ultimate worship. مُخُ العبادة, it's the essence and the core of worship. Dua, it's such a powerful thing. And really think about it. People talk about helplessness. God forbid, never, Allah protect everyone. But if someone found out that their loved one, maybe a parent, maybe a spouse, maybe a sibling, and, God forbid, maybe a child, had such an aggressive, far gone case of cancer that they basically said there's no treatment now, and so there's nothing that you can do, tell me if you wouldn't still give up sleeping at night and just commit yourself to that sajada, that prayer rug, and say, oh Allah, I'm not moving from here. Would we or wouldn't we do that if it was a loved one? So why are we so skeptical of the idea? Why do we scoff at the idea when we're told that really get together and make dua, wake up in the night and pray and, fall on your knees and spread your hands before Allah. And, if all, 1.68 whatever billion Muslims in the world all came to their knees at the same time and spread their hands before Allah at the same time, why do we underestimate the power and the magnitude that could have?
I mean, truly, I think one of the problems that we have as a community is that we do have a sense of agnosticism that runs through us. And what I mean,
that spiritual dissonance.
Well, it's Muslim agnosticism, right? So it's easy to be Muslim when it's easy to be Muslim. Does that make sense?
It does.
But when things are hitting the fan, then all of a sudden now well, is he hearing my prayers? Right? But when things go well, yeah, he's hearing my prayers for sure.
Right.
But when things are tough and I'm struggling and I'm being put, my feet are being held to the fire, either me or somebody that I love or that I look at, and there's just tragedy after tragedy, there's that question, well, what good is it going to do anyways? We don't really have that element of certainty, which is so necessary for dua. Certainty basically is what dua is built upon, right? That you're supposed to have that understanding that Allah will answer.
Yeah.
One of the etiquettes of praying to Allah is walking away from that session believing fully it's done.
Absolutely.
Almost as much as you would when you click the confirm button on booking your ticket. You show up at the airport because I did it. It should be there. It's almost like if we had that expectation, that certainty and the hadith, right, mentioning that, like the bird that goes out for its day, so much trust in Allah that it doesn't know where it's going to get it from, but it knows that Allah will provide.
Yeah.
I think really trying to focus on that being a core relationship element with Allah is going to remedy, but we have a sort of helplessness.
Yeah.
Right? People say things like, what else besides dua can we do? And I'm not trying to sound too uber spiritual hippie guy, but since when did dua become the last resort?
I'm reminded of that. I think it was Ghouth ibn al-Harith, I think was the name, about that story from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, where when the Prophet ﷺ was asleep under the tree and the sword was hanging, and the man came and grabbed the sword and basically said that Man yamna'uka minni, who's going to protect you now from me? I got you. And the Prophet ﷺ said, without he became Muslim, this person, he said there was just not a wrinkle on his face, not a bead of sweat, there was no worry in the world. He had these clear open eyes and just looked at me almost pleasantly and said, Allah. That's that level of yaqeen and conviction.
Just absolute. You know who has this, by the way? Elders.
Yeah.
Old people have this, and old people and people who struggle, elders who have struggled. You mentioned a couple times a story about your dad and the family business that y'all run and or ran. And my mom and dad, obviously, alhamdulillah, we were blessed a lot. But then obviously my dad got laid off, like a lot of people did in the early 2000s, and so there was obviously that struggle that was there. And for some reason, there was something about the spirituality of elder people.
Yeah.
That didn't grow up in this postmodern secular society of social media and hyper capitalism and self entitlement and all that stuff that we talk about, that where they really do they lean on Allah.
Yeah, there's a narration about having the iman of an elderly person.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that narration.
Yeah.
And why do we lack that? Why do you think because now our audience primarily are younger people, right? Why? Where's that?
Aside from that one brother in Pittsburgh.
Aside from yeah.
I had to just, mashallah, he pulled me aside, and I was really kind of embarrassed. I was like, please don't sit there and listen to
I put
me.
music in the beginning.
No, I was just like, don't waste your time. But no, he was saying he really enjoys it. But I don't know. I think it's a combination of different things. Maybe it's the experience that they've been through. They've been through the ups and downs. They've seen, the highs and lows. They've seen that things go bad and then things get right again. It
is interesting because one of the in Imam Mawlud's book about the purification of the heart, he addresses one of the diseases, which is lack of trust in Allah and too much dependence on this life, basically.
Yeah.
and he says one of the it's pretty psychologically common sense, but he says like, why don't you just think for a moment about all the times where you thought that you were going to fail or life was going to end and Allah pulled you through it. Like somehow, you're running late and somehow Allah made you get through it. You're running late for a flight, you're running late for a job interview. And basically he says, okay, now after you've thought about a few of those, just ask yourself what's so different about this situation. Like, Absolutely. Doesn't it feel like there's nothing, that's going to happen? And it's interesting actually, because there was a ceasefire in Aleppo briefly. I think I don't know, like all the reports are obviously very filtered, and the internet is trying. People on the internet are trying to be as raw as possible, but we don't know right what's going on exactly. And I saw some people say something really remarkable, which was, subhanAllah, the ceasefire. I saw this person actually that said the ceasefire, maybe that was a result of all of us praying, right? Or everyone in the world praying. Right. Maybe these things. And so I personally, when these moments happen to me, the first thing that comes to my mind is my own negligence when it comes to these things. Yeah. Like me, what have I been doing? And that, I think that's why when I got home, dinner didn't taste as good as it did, because I was sort of disappointed in myself for having forgotten these people until it became to this stage. One
of the really good habits that my dad kind of instilled in us is having a sadaqah box at home that we put something in every single day. So it's kind of like this constant reminder, kind of like how salah we pray 5 times a day. So the sadaqah box, you put something in it every single day. And then when something like this actually happens that grabs your attention even more so, then we kind of like get the sadaqah box, everybody pack into the car, drive over to the masjid or wherever we're going to be dropping off that sadaqah, and then basically go and contribute it.
That's genius.
And did that with the kids, and it was an opportunity for me to do something instead of just kind of sit around and, just kind of twiddle my thumbs. And it also became an opportunity to kind of explain to the kids that, look, something bad's happening right now, and that's whenever something bad happens, we have to do something about it.
It's a question that a lot of people ask is like, should they expose their kids to these things? Should when, how old are your kids?
9 and 7.
9?
9 is
She's
Maria's
9 now.
Yeah.
I was about to say 6. I feel so old.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I mean, you are old, but I just feel I feel old. So 9 and 7. So that's pretty healthy of an age to show them some pain in the world, I think, and given especially the fact that they're living in a very, very macroeconomically privileged society.
Absolutely.
Micro levels, of course, there's still struggle, but macro, like there's Wi-Fi everywhere. There's electricity, this and that. There's running water. What do you tell parents who are sort of struggling? Maybe they're noticeably irritated or agitated at the situation, and their 4-year-old is picking up on these things. Do you recommend? Do you think it's wise to talk to your children about how there's tragedy and struggle in the world?
I think so, and I think just kind of
why.
I think it's just giving them the full spectrum of everything that exists in the world. A lot of, the way that we kind of live and the way a lot of our communities and societies are structured, the way our neighborhoods are essentially, I know there's been a lot of talk about this recently, but they are segregated without being, officially quote unquote segregated, but wink, wink segregated. There's gentrification of neighborhoods and things like that. So growing up in a bubble is a very, very real thing. And I think more so for our kids than a lot of other kids, because again, I'm not saying one place is better than another. I'm just talking about what I've experienced. This Ramadan, I took my kids to Umrah, and they saw little kids, begging and asking for money or food after Salah when we're coming out. And,
what did they say?
They were just kind of like, Mommy, those kids don't have food? Where's their mommy?
Yeah, like the assumption.
Yeah. And we had to explain to them.
Why don't they just go to their fridge?
Exactly. And we had to explain to them that, baby, maybe they do have their mommy, but their mommy doesn't have food either. Well, that's not good. Who's going to give them food? And then that's like, well, we are supposed to.
Yeah, turning it into something.
Yeah.
We're getting a question right now, actually, on Instagram Live, which is, do you think, basically someone said, sorry, I'm doing this live. should we expose all facets of society to children, but how do we explain the lack of a response? So when kids are saying, like, why are people letting this happen? It's a very innocent question, but in some ways it's very poignant.
Yeah, it is.
So Dad, Mom, why aren't people coming to save them?
Yeah.
Right? If it's so clear.
And then my approach, and again, I can't say this is right or wrong or this is the way to do it. I don't want to give anyone that impression.
We're just talking about our experiences.
Yeah, my own approach has kind of been...
But we're right, but yeah, go ahead.
No, my approach has just been to kind of tell them that, you know how Abu had to explain this to you? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we need people to remind us and explain us certain things, explain things to us, remind us. You know, I was like, you know how sometimes when you come home and you start playing a game or coloring or reading or in the backyard running around and you forget to, you know, do your chores, or you forget that it's time for prayer and Mommy and Abu have to come and get you and kind of tell you it's time to pray. Well, sometimes people need to be reminded of what's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is that you're teaching them or empowering them that they can be helpful in this situation. So since they recognize that maybe there aren't people who are helping or the lack of a response, you say, well, that's your job.
Exactly.
Right? And you put the onus, even from a young age. I think that it's really important for parents to not teach their children to be helpless.
Yeah.
And to just be, and honestly, from a young age, I think entitlement and privilege and wealth, it lends itself to that helplessness.
It does.
Like, well, what can I do? But at the end of the day, because they're in so much comfort, you know, there's no sense of resourcefulness.
Not at all.
I mean, the Sadaqah box idea is great. You know, there's even opportunities for parents to organize things like my wife just did at her Islamic school, a hot chocolate week, where they sold hot chocolate in the morning and all the kids came in and bought hot chocolate. And like, I think that money ended up going to charity or something.
That's awesome.
These are things that they seem, again, very micro. Like, oh, okay, that's cute. But in reality, first of all, you know, like even half a date will go to helping people.
Correct.
And the second thing is that more so than that amount of money, you're building a culture.
Yeah.
You're raising a culture.
Absolutely.
So now the question of, well, where is humanity?
Yeah.
You're answering it by saying, well, maybe I can't fix it right this moment. Maybe I can't wake up everybody right this moment, but I can make sure that these 100 kids that I'm in charge of in my Sunday school or in my classroom or in my home, my children, they are raised with a social consciousness to know that this isn't right.
Every great person that we've seen that's done amazing things that really has had an impact, like Dr. King or, you know, Malcolm X, rahimahullah, or anybody else, they always end up talking about their parents and, you know, kind of what they grew up with and what they saw and how their parents were trying to make a difference and do good. And they kind of grow up in that culture and that environment of, no, we serve.
Yeah. Modeling.
Yeah.
You just pick up on it.
Absolutely.
One of the scholars, contemporary scholars, he gave a lecture and he said that, you know, your kids will learn more with their eyes than they will from your tongue.
Absolutely.
Like their eyes will teach them more.
Absolutely.
Another question that comes to mind with situations like this, whether it's Aleppo or whether it's Central Africa or whether it's Burma, or whether it is wherever, or whether it's African American people being gunned down in America, right? And just down the street or just in the next state over or whatever. What is the spiritually healthy response of a person when they are hearing about this and perhaps they're on their way to something recreational? So, for example, I'm going to, just to be very real, you and I, are you coming tomorrow night?
No.
Oh, you're out of town.
Yeah.
Okay. Normally you would be there.
Yeah.
So Bayallah got all these tickets to go see Star Wars.
Right.
So we're all going tomorrow night.
Right.
That was actually one of the, I think that was like the second or third thing that popped in my head was, should I even still go?
Yeah.
And I was sort of having that internal debate of, well, you know, should I still go? Is it appropriate to go? Is this something that we should cancel? Where's the line? And is making everyone feel doom and gloom, is that productive?
Right.
You know, are we hyper happy? Are we hyper social and recreational in society? Do we need kind of a night off? Do we need to maybe cancel it? Or is there another way that you think is spiritually beneficial or healthy for people to respond to things like this?
So there's three things that come to mind when this is said. Number one is that I don't think that matters and issues like this are necessarily binary, that there is a right and there's a wrong. I think that different folks have maybe different ways of kind of channeling that consciousness, that awareness, that sting.
Like medicine and dosage, right?
Exactly.
Like not everyone needs the same dosage or
No.
even same pill.
Exactly. Somebody might still end up going because they're, maybe taking their younger brother, they're going with a couple of friends or something like that, and it's just their way to kind of bond with some friends. But just as long as they're going to realize that I'm going to go, but then as a consequence or a result of that, I'm going to donate the same amount of money to something charitable. I'm going to contribute the same amount of time to some type of good cause.
Which was actually one of the things that in, I think it was Ta'lim Muta'allim by Imam Zarnuji, he said that Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, had a habit, his practice of finances was he wouldn't buy things for himself or his family unless he had donated the same amount.
That's amazing.
So if I buy a phone that's $300, before I buy the phone, I walk over to the charity org and I donate that amount, the same amount. And he's almost like he's saying, I'm not going to enjoy more than I give people or help people.
And I think that's awesome.
Number one, basically, is what
number
you're saying.
one. Number two is that if somebody does feel and is at the level or even just feels for themselves that the only way to really kind of wake themselves up and, kind of motivate themselves and mobilize themselves is to actually say, nope, I'm not going to go, then I think that's very admirable even on their part.
Okay.
I don't criticize that person.
So some people, this is also a lesson for a lot of people who are Muslim, that spirituality has different forms.
Completely.
So for some people, actually, it might be better for them to take their siblings
right
to the movie because that bond might allow for a conversation later over dessert.
And just kind of be like, or let's say you're going with like your 4 Star Wars nerd friends, right? Danish.
Dressed in your Moroccan,
all of them named Danish.
Moroccan thobes.
Yeah. So you're going with your 4 Star Wars nerd friends, and afterwards, you kind of standing outside talking about it, or someone's like, hey, let's go sit down somewhere and grab some coffee or something.
Yeah.
And then you kind of take that opportunity and kind of be like, listen, guys, I'm going to kind of, put that hat on for a second.
Get into real mode.
I'm going to be that guy. We had a great time. We were very privileged that we have this time, this safety, this security, this comfort, and even the finances to be able to enjoy this. Tomorrow morning, all of us, there's nobody can opt out of this. It's not optional. We are all praying Fajr at the masjid, and then we're driving over to the soup kitchen, and we're all going to spend a couple hours there feeding people.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Or put together some effort.
Yeah, right now, while we're sitting here, everybody take out your phone, go to IslamicRelief.org, and everybody drop a $20 donation.
Yeah.
Before we leave here right now.
Or gather something.
And that now mobilized a lot more people. So that, I think, is really remarkable and profound.
Yeah.
And a person should not and cannot be criticized for that. And meanwhile, one of those buddies just kind of said, didn't really shame anybody, didn't project their superiority over anyone. Because the crime here, we were reading in Tafsir in Ibn Kathir at the seminary, that the kana bad'u dhunubi al-kibr, that the first sin was arrogance, shaitan, iblis. So everything evil that human beings do kind of stems from that same arrogance. And so if you're spiritual, if you're quote unquote spirituality, your notion of apparently being more spiritual or conscious leads to arrogance, then you've actually become a part of the problem without realizing it. And so, but quietly, silently, they're kind of like, hey dude, where are you? Waiting for you. Be like, oh, you guys go ahead. I wasn't able to make it today.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, I'm not going to go. And instead, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to read some Quran, I'm going to make some dua, I'm going to pray some raka'at, and I'm just going to, just kind of contribute this time. And that person should not criticize the others, nor should that person be criticized.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the third thing that it just kind of comes to mind, which I think is fairly obvious to sensible folks, and you kind of alluded to it, and that is the whole culture of what one of our friends, Umar Usman, called the shame grenade. That's just got no khair in it. That's just got no good in it.
It rarely, I think, like on a mass level, like mass meaning MASS, not the organization, it doesn't really yield benefit.
It does not.
Like going out and tweeting, I've seen this with so many different levels.
Yeah.
Like, I tweeted yesterday because I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes, people use Twitter as their diary. So I wrote, I said, this is killing me. Like seeing these pictures and scrolling. And as much as I don't know, I'm always kind of, teetering back and forth on this issue of like whether or not we should be sharing these photos and images. Some people say no because it's just too harsh and it's not healthy to see this. But that part of me is like, this is the real world. Like I'm almost like how much shelter can we claim,
Yeah.
Like even the fact that I have the ability to put my phone down is enough of a shelter for me. Like
versus having a dead body lying next to you.
Exactly. If I'm getting mad because but I'm always, as a mental health professional, I can try to hopefully see both sides of the coin. But the one thing that I tweeted, I was like, this is killing me. This is breaking my heart seeing this, and I don't feel right, and I feel wrong, and I feel very out of sorts. And someone responded, the internet, you ready? I said, well, don't you feel bad about what's happening to the Muslims in Central Africa? As if like that, as if number one, they think that they're saying it as if I don't, as if I don't feel bad and I don't make dua for Muslims all over the world.
In that article that
Central Africa,
in that article that Umar had written, he had kind of talked about that idea that there's almost like this notion that empathy and du'as and concern is like zero sum.
Yeah, it's like 1 or 0, right?
Exactly.
So you choose. Like if I say that I like, brown, does that mean that I don't like green?
Right.
So like human beings are very nuanced
We're Muslim.
creatures.
We love green.
We love green.
Yeah, we're Muslim.
Is the Rabi al-Awwal?
It is.
It is.
No jokes.
Sallallahu.
Don't do that.
Okay, I won't. I'm not. It wasn't a joke. You're supposed to join me. But anyways, moving forward. So the idea is like people basically shame grenading other people.
It's terrible.
It doesn't actually motivate you.
No.
But I will say this. I will qualify this. If you know somebody and if you already have an existing relationship with them and if you love one another, you've been through things, you're close, you can
get real with someone.
You can get real with them.
Yes.
And that's not shame grenading. The shame grenade, explodes and hits everybody. If I'm sitting with you, just like you said, if you're sitting after a movie with your friends, you've been friends for a while and you know each other, you can say, hey, y'all, like we just spent a total of like $300 on tickets and food. Like, can we put together at least $150 or $200 for charity?
Yeah.
And you're not shame grenading at that point. What you're doing is you're doing what's called al-amru bil ma'ruf, right? You're encouraging people to do good and you're offering nasiha. And this is really where it comes down to. I think one of the things that I'll say is that a lot of us feel very, very disheartened at the events, but that feeling is actually already a good sign. Mm-hmm. If I don't even think about it, if I don't even feel anything, like if someone cuts me on the leg and I don't feel it, is that a good or bad sign for my nerves? It's a bad sign.
Terrible.
My nerves aren't working. So if I look at these pictures and these images and I feel heartbroken, the first thing you can say is that, well, at least I feel something.
Right.
At least I don't just look over it and say, oh, that's tough.
Right.
The world sucks.
Alhamdulillah, la in shakartum la azidannakum.
Yeah, exactly.
And Allah will increase that sensitivity and that empathy and allow us to emulate the Prophet ﷺ, where everyone's suffering was just so hard on him.
Yeah.
Azizun alayhi ma anittum. It was hard on him. Yeah.
Like he took it personally.
Absolutely.
So that's number one. The second thing I'll say is a lot of times when you read these texts of like Imam Ghazali and others, like they actually highlight something really interesting. They say that basically the quickness with which you respond, like for example, the adhan, right? So you know it's time to pray. The quickness, the urgency, let's say, with which you get up to pray is a huge indication for you as far as how you're doing.
Right.
So how am I doing with Allah? Well, did I pray Asr at the beginning or the end of Asr today? Like that's like one of the things he talks about. Like if you love Allah, you like urgently do it.
Right.
So how long do we wait to donate or organize? Do we wait until the next tragedy or the next one or the next one? Or, like imagine like when you miss a flight and you see the gate closing, you still run to the gate and beg the person to let you in.
Absolutely.
So when we see tragedies like this, there is no such thing as too late.
Right.
We run to the tragedy and we gather charity and we beg Allah to accept it. And we try to basically like push it. Like, okay, how can I support? And we're lucky, alhamdulillah, that we're born in a generation where it's so easy to donate. It's incredibly easy. Like my wife was on Facebook yesterday and she was like, should we donate? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Whatever amount you want to do. And it literally came from her Apple Pay account.
Wow.
It was super easy, super simple. So don't ever lose hope. Like, don't underestimate and undervalue your doing of this, because also on top of you contributing to it, it's also a big sign for you and how you feel. One of the other things that we were sort of talking about before the episode, was the sort of, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Like, the next day and the day after and the day after, do we develop a sense of narcissism? How do we think about Allah? Why do these things happen?
Yeah.
You know, like, one of the famous questions, existential questions people have, why do bad things happen to good people?
Right.
Or we can say, why do tragic things happen to innocent people?
Right.
I was recently reading a text by Izzuddin Ibn Abdussalam about the benefits of tribulation, because Sheikh Hamza translated it, and I wanted to also read the Arabic and kind of get a feel for it. And he said the one thing that's profound that I thought of when I was thinking about the situation, and that is that as tragic as things seem to be, you don't really know what is good or what is bad. Things just are what they are.
Right.
And Allah has, in his own wisdom and estimation, what is good or what is bad.
Yeah.
But we can say this is horrible.
Right.
But the ultimate reality of that thing, right? The ultimate reality of that thing actually may be different.
Right.
For example, all of these people are martyrs.
Correct.
All these people are dying in martyrdom.
Absolutely.
And we know the
Bila
narrations about passing away for the sake of Allah, whether it's in childbirth or drowning or like this, being killed, that those people will basically be in the proximity of Allah and Jannah before their bodies hit the ground.
SubhanAllah.
And so when you think about the afterlife, you're like, man, I would love that. You know, like I'm working so hard to get there. Like I'm like struggling to pray Fajr every morning. I'm like fasting. I'm trying to give charity. And this person earns it in like a second.
Yeah.
So for us, it's horrible. And for them at that moment, it's horrific. It's frightening. It's tragic. There's PTSD happening. But the minute that they reach the afterlife. And so Izzuddin ibn Abdussalam was basically saying, like, put everything in the context of the afterlife.
Correct.
And you can still feel sorry for them. It's painful. The Prophet ﷺ cried when his son died.
Right.
But at the same time, you don't lose complete hope in God.
No.
Is that, I think, what...
So I was going to say, St. Thomas Aquinas, in basically his, his masterpiece where he talked about theology, he said that all the different objections to religion and God were just frivolous, were very easily dismissed. He said there were only really two questions that I felt like thoroughly had to be answered, and really two things that had to be wrestled with. And one of them, and he said this was the bigger one of the two, which was the problem of evil.
Human suffering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Human suffering. He just kind of summarized it as a problem of evil, but the biggest part of that was human suffering. Yeah. And he talks about it extensively, and he talks about how there's almost like this, and he even talked about how even that crisis of faith that comes from a very, kind of almost like a very good and beautiful place where there's, and he said, because he said it's not like an intellectual objection, because the other problem he talked about was basically scientific explanations for everything in existence.
Okay.
And he said then that's kind of like the intellectual arrogance.
Yeah.
But he said this is almost like this feeling of abandonment. And so it's almost like a spiritual crying out.
Interesting.
Like somebody's just hurting that
like
bad.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
I just want it to stop.
Yeah.
Because they love other creation so much that it hurts them. And
so what you're saying is actually that initial thought is actually good.
It just, again, like you said before, it just means you are a human being.
So this is interesting for two things, because number one is that whenever we have these doubts, crisis thoughts, right? Like crisis feelings of like, would God let this happen? First of all, this, from what you're saying to me, and I've never heard this before.
Yeah.
This is a little bit reassuring.
Yeah.
Because at the same time we're having that doubt, we also don't want to lose faith in Allah.
Right.
The second thing, and this is a little bit more profound, is that if someone ever expresses this doubt to somebody else, this completely changes the processing of it.
Yeah.
So instead of being like, oh, how could you say that? You know, like, how could you doubt Allah's mercy, blah, blah, blah. Imagine leading off that conversation with your son or daughter or your friend or your spouse or your whoever. your youth group kid or your Sunday school, by saying, you know what, that's a beautiful feeling that you're like. That question is so remarkable.
Right. And he says
it changes the whole conversation.
It does. And he says that this already tells you that this is someone whose heart leads their mind.
Oh, subhanAllah, which is a prerequisite of faith.
Exactly. So he said what the first response when you interact with someone like that's going through that is that your first job is to just kind of listen and just, comfort them. And then he kind of gets into the whole very, you can say, philosophical conversation where he says, evil or bad is not really, a thing in an entity itself. And it's more of the bad choices of people and consequences of our actions and things like that. He goes through all of that. But, one of the things that I kind of felt that his analysis, and granted, I mean, he was a theist as well. So he, of course, did have some concept of the afterlife. But I didn't feel like he had placed enough emphasis on it as much as maybe our tradition does. But basically what solves that entire problem, at least in my viewpoint, and, is like you just said, is an ukhrawi mindset, which basically is when you frame it in terms of life of the hereafter. And you brought up the son, like when the son of the Prophet ﷺ, Ibrahim, passed away, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he was still a baby, and the Prophet ﷺ was crying and his tears were falling on Ibrahim's body as he was holding him, and he said those beautiful words, إِنَّ الْعَيْنَ لَتَدْمَعُ وَإِنَّ الْقَلْبَ لَيَحْزُنُ وَإِنَّا لِفِرَاقِكَ لَمَحْزُونُونَ يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ وَلَا نَقُولُ إِلَّا مَا يُرْضِي رَبَّنَا, that the eye sheds tears and the heart aches, and we miss you, O Ibrahim. But we shall not say except that. Well, the only thing we'll say is what pleases our Lord and Master. The Prophet ﷺ then smiled, and they asked him, why did you smile, O Messenger of Allah? And he said that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed me that Ibrahim is in paradise and looked after by the Ibrahim alayhi salam.
Oh, wow.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he was still nursing, and he said, as a father I couldn't help but think, but he needs to be fed. He's a baby. And the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah appointed not only one but two wet nurses of paradise to take care and feed Ibrahim.
Wow. Never be hungry.
So the akhirah changes the equation.
And this, by the way, is like a very common coping mechanism for us. Even psychologically, when I'm struggling in a semester academically, what do I think of? Win a break.
Yeah.
So I got my eyes on the prize, right? Like when I'm going through, and this isn't weakness. This is actually called perspective.
Yeah.
When I'm struggling through a class, I'm like, man, I can't wait for summer vacation, or I can't wait until Thanksgiving or whatever, just to kind of give myself some relief. If we view paradise as the ultimate relief and this life as being challenging, right?
Yeah.
Difficult, and there is challenges and there will be challenges, then it's not, it's not like a cop-out to talk about Jannah or the afterlife. In fact, it is the spiritually wise thing to do because it's really the only thing you can bank on.
Right.
Like I can't tell you if you go through a bad day today, I can't say, well, what, tomorrow will be better.
Yeah.
I can hope that tomorrow will be better, but tomorrow might be worse.
Right.
The only thing I can say is that, inshallah, after going through this, if you're patient, it'll be good. Yesterday for Activist Well, we went over the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ came across the woman who was crying in Riyadh al-Salihin, and she was crying over it's said in one narration it was her son.
Yeah.
She was crying over the grave of her son, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, ittaqillah. And we talked about, ittaqillah, if you grew up as like an Egyptian like me, that was a very scary phrase.
Yeah.
Because usually like a slap came afterwards.
Sure.
But what I was talking about with the students on the Activist Well was, if you frame taqwa as being something that's actually makes you feel comfortable and relieving, like I feel protected because I'm aware of Allah, as opposed to something that's always making you feel frightened all the time, then that statement now actually, along with making you kind of keeping you on the straight path, it actually gives you a sense of comfort.
Yeah, I don't know why, I always talk about with the students the frustration with translation and the obsession with translations. And the commitment to translation, but not the text itself and the concepts themselves. Ittaqillah is yes, remember Allah, be conscious of Allah, remember your commitment to Allah, but remember your commitment to Allah because Allah has never, stopped taking care of you.
Yeah, and the word taqwa shares the same root as waqaya, right?
Right.
Waqaya,
Protection.
shield. So having like this shield, That's not scary, actually. Having a shield is actually quite relieving.
It's almost like a reminder that, walk out in the rain, and it's kind of like, hey, you have an umbrella in your hand.
Exactly. And that sense of relief that you
just
feel.
Just open it up.
Or, when I'm driving in Dallas and it's sunny and I see my sunglasses, I'm like, thank God.
Yeah.
That's what taqwa feels like.
Right.
So when this woman is crying and she's mourning and he says, ittaqillah, he's not telling her, like, what the heck's wrong with you? Obviously, he's a human being and he's lost people. He knows.
6 of his children.
Right? 6 children, father before birth, mother, grandfather, uncle, wife. I mean, you're talking about a person who has experienced loss to the nth degree. And it's interesting because her claim, actually, before she noticed it was him, was that you don't know what I'm going through.
Ajee.
It was so strange. And so, but his response to her, his reminder to her was, take some solace in knowing Allah is with you. And so at the very least, the response that we have, and I've seen this, by the way, from both sides, the response that we have in this whole tragedy, or any tragedy, as difficult as it might be to swallow, and it should be, by the way. I'm not saying that anyone should be like, oh, you know what? Well, it's another tragedy. Allah said this would happen. No, because the Prophet ﷺ, like we said,
that's exactly what we were saying should not happen.
Or he cried. He said that the eyes shed tears, the heart yearns. But then he says, I'll never say anything that displeases Allah. So at the end of it all, he's almost actually teaching us how to process through tragedy, which is that grieve,
right?
Feel your pain,
right?
Express your pain, process your pain. But make sure at the end of all of it, you don't let that pain consume you.
Not at all.
To the point where you toss your relationship with Allah.
Right.
And that's not to marginalize or to diminish or to mute the suffering, but it's almost like this is going to be the source of the relief that we're looking for. So don't toss it out.
No.
Don't toss your relationship out, because that iman is what's actually going to help solve this problem that's causing you so much pain and distress.
Right. There was something I wanted to mention here, kind of at this particular point. I'm just trying to gather my thoughts. I was paying attention, so I kind of lost my own train of thought. But anyways, this makes for a very entertaining listen.
Well, we did cover a lot.
We did
kind of bully through that.
Yeah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala... Oh, yes, now I remember. One of the very interesting things, and I don't mean for this to be a plug because it's not selling anything. It's not like advertising anything. It's a very awesome effort. It's a sincere effort. Their tragedy, like this massacre occurred during the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, very famously known as Bir Ma'una, where there were 70 who were like dedicated full-time students of the Prophet ﷺ. And somebody had kind of come and, lied and said, oh, I need teachers to take them and convert a bunch of people and teach them Quran and this and that. So he sent these Sahaba, and they were led into an ambush, and then they were massacred. And when the Prophet ﷺ found out about it, he was devastated. He was really just heartbroken by it. And the narrations, Bukhari and Muslim say, قَنَتَ شَهْرًا. The Prophet ﷺ then established a practice and taught a practice for a whole month. He performed something called Qunut Nazila, Qunut Nawazil, or Qunut Nazila, which is a special dua that's made in the prayer itself, the congregational obligatory prayer, that is a response to tragedy, Nazila. And there are some really good folks, globally, who kind of get together. There's a particular sister in Chicago. I know she coordinates a lot of the effort. And we did this a few years back when I believe there was the situation in Gaza going on.
Yeah, during the summer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she reached out. I recorded a little message just encouraging people to sign up for it. And, obviously, if I don't even know the URL completely off the top of my head. But what I'll do is, we'll tweet it out. We'll post it on Facebook and things like that as right now, inshallah. So when you're listening to this, you can go and find it there. But they're basically organizing these global campaigns of Muslims all piling into masajid for Fajr. And then in the Fajr prayer, that dua, that qunut being offered collectively, millions of Muslims worldwide,
So go keep an eye on your Twitter.
Absolutely.
So Abdul Nasser J. You're going to tweet this out.
Abdul Nasser J. On Twitter, it's at Abdul Nasser J. And then I'll put it on the Facebook page as well.
Okay.
And
also Qalam Institute.
Qalam Institute will put on the Qalam Institute, at Qalam Institute, both the Facebook page and the Twitter and yours. And I'll have Mufti Kamani and others shared as well. And so join in. You can take it. You can kind of take it to your local masjid, take it to your local imam, kind of sign up your masjid, publicize it in your community. I remember last time we did it at Fajr Salah, where we usually have like 30, 40 people. We had like 400 people. It looked like Jummah prayer. It was like a Saturday Fajr prayer. It was like 400 people, and it was just it was powerful.
Yeah,
it was powerful and it was productive. It was good. So inshallah, that's definitely in that same vein that we talked about spirituality. I think it's a good, very positive effort. May Allah reward them for putting it together. And I think that's a good first kind of organized step in the right direction.
Okay. All right. So we'll definitely share that as well.
Inshallah.
And I think that, hopefully through this conversation, people have been able to, we don't claim to have the solutions to problems. I think that's a big thing that, and if anyone does, like, maybe you should just not hang around them. Because, like, a lot of these problems, like, the solution...
فَرُدُّهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ.
Yeah, the solution actually is basically within, the sacred sources. And if anything new...
And reconnecting to Allah and channeling the prophetic practice, that's the real solution for this world.
And we believe that, wholeheartedly. But I think one of our goals for the Hangout, typically it's a little bit more light than this, but given the situation, one of our with this and also previous, the election was another episode that was a little bit heavier. Our goal in these kind of episodes is simply just to talk it out.
Yeah, because
we also need. I mean, this is like therapy for me.
Yeah, it's cathartic, it's therapeutic,
and hopefully by listening to it, maybe you've had some questions or you've had some thoughts that we've shared, and hopefully through just tossing around some ideas from the Quran and the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we've been able to help each other, and that's really the goal.
So one thing I wanted to kind of request everyone to do, because as I've been traveling around talking to people, a lot of folks are listening and they're enjoying the conversation, and I would love for them to become a part of the conversation, especially on a topic like this. So reflections and thoughts, beneficial ayat of the Quran or experiences from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you can think of that you'd like to share and kind of make a part of the conversation. So one place that is where everybody can kind of go to is that if you go to Qalam Institute, where the podcast is on iTunes, and there you can basically leave a comment. So go there and kind of write a little reflection or a thought. I'm not saying Facebook or Twitter, not that anything's wrong with it, but it just kind of gets lost in the shuffle. It's very busy places. And it just, disappears into the abyss that is timeline. So if you kind of go there and leave it in the comments there, I know that I go there and I'll read the comments and other folks as well. While you're leaving comments, read the other comments as well there on the iTunes page, and hopefully it's a place that we can kind of be conversing with each other. Inshallah.
Yeah. Or if you do happen to tweet into the storm, just make sure you tag it Qalam Hangout.
Yeah.
And also you can tag it with hashtag Aleppo as well, inshallah. And that way we'll be able to keep track of it and share it as well. Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. As always,
Barakallahu
thank you so
feekum
much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us, and hopefully the things you've shared with us, inshallah, we can act on them and really try to make some movement, inshallah. Everybody, thank you for joining us again, inshallah. Looking forward to seeing y'all, inshallah, every Thursday morning. Make sure you come hang out with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.